You step into your bedroom after an intense training session. Your muscles ache, your body feels heavy, and every fiber of your being yearns for rest. You collapse into bed, and within moments, you're drifting into unconsciousness. But here's what most people don't realize. The moment you close your eyes and surrender to sleep, your body begins the most powerful recovery process known to human physiology. While you lie motionless in the dark, an intricate biological symphony unfolds, one that determines whether your workout actually builds muscle or simply breaks it down. Tonight, we're diving deep into the hidden world of sleep and muscle recovery. We're going to explore why the hours you spend unconscious matter more than the hours you spend in the gym. We're going to uncover the precise molecular mechanisms that either construct or destroy your muscular gains while you sleep. And most importantly, we're going to understand why sleep isn't just a passive state of rest. It's the most active anabolic process your body performs. Welcome back to the Optimal Life Project. This is an After Dark episode, which means we're going deep. We're not skimming the surface tonight. We're examining the intricate relationship between sleep architecture and muscle protein synthesis, between hormonal rhythms and recovery timelines, between conscious training and unconscious adaptation. If you've ever wondered why some people make incredible progress in the gym, while others stagnate despite working just as hard, the answer often lies not in what they do during their waking hours, but in what happens during those precious hours of darkness. Let's begin with a fundamental truth that many people overlook. Your workout doesn't build muscle. That might sound counterintuitive, but it's absolutely accurate. When you lift weights, when you push your body through intense physical exertion, you're not building tissue. You're actually tearing it down. Every rep, every set, every moment of muscular tension creates micro-damage throughout your muscle fibers. This damage is necessary, but it's not productive by itself. The actual growth, the actual adaptation, the actual transformation of your body occurs afterward, during recovery. And the most powerful phase of that recovery happens while you sleep. Think about it this way. If you trained intensely every single day without adequate sleep, what would happen? Your muscles wouldn't grow larger and stronger. They would shrink. They would weaken. You'd experience what researchers call overtraining syndrome, a state where your body cannot recover from the cumulative damage you're inflicting upon it. This isn't theoretical. Studies demonstrate that athletes who restrict their sleep to fewer than 6 hours per night lose muscle mass even while maintaining their training regimen. The training stimulus remains constant, but the recovery opportunity disappears, and the result is muscle loss rather than muscle gain. So what makes sleep so uniquely powerful for recovery? The answer lies in the profound changes that occur in your body's biochemistry when you enter deep sleep. During your waking hours, your body exists in a predominantly catabolic state, meaning it's breaking down more tissue than it's building. This makes sense from a physiological standpoint. When you're active, moving, thinking, and engaging with the world, your body needs readily available energy. It mobilizes stored nutrients, breaks down compounds for fuel, and prioritizes immediate function over long-term construction. But when you sleep, particularly when you enter the deeper stages of non-REM sleep, this entire dynamic reverses. Your body shifts into a predominantly anabolic state, one where construction supersedes destruction, where rebuilding takes precedence over breaking down. This shift isn't subtle. It's dramatic, coordinated, and precisely orchestrated by your endocrine system through the release of specific hormones at specific times during specific sleep stages. The first and perhaps most important player in this nocturnal recovery symphony is growth hormone. Now, growth hormone gets released throughout the day in small pulses, but these daytime releases pale in comparison to what happens at night. Research demonstrates that approximately 70% of your daily growth hormone secretion occurs during sleep, and the timing is remarkably consistent. Within the first hour after you fall asleep, as you transition into deep, slow-wave sleep, your pituitary gland unleashes what researchers call the major pulse of growth hormone secretion. This isn't a gradual trickle, it's a substantial surge. Studies measuring growth hormone in the bloodstream show concentrations rising from baseline levels to peaks ranging from 13 to 72 millimicrograms per milliliter, with individual variation based on factors like age, sleep quality, and overall health status. This massive pulse typically lasts between 1.5 to 3.5 hours, coinciding precisely with that first period of deep sleep. Think about what this means. Your body is literally flooding itself with one of the most powerful anabolic hormones it can produce. And it's doing this specifically during sleep, specifically during the deepest, most restorative stage of sleep. What's particularly fascinating is how tightly coupled growth hormone release is to slow-wave sleep. Researchers have conducted experiments where they deliberately disrupted people's sleep architecture, allowing them to sleep but preventing them from entering deep, slow-wave sleep. The result? Growth hormone secretion plummeted. Even though the subjects were sleeping, even though they were lying in bed for 8 hours, their growth hormone levels remained suppressed because they weren't achieving the proper sleep architecture. Conversely, when researchers extended someone's time in slow-wave sleep, growth hormone secretion increased proportionally. This coupling between sleep depth and growth hormone release is so robust that scientists can actually predict growth hormone levels by measuring the amount of slow-wave sleep someone achieves. The more time you spend in that deep, restorative stage of sleep characterized by large, slow brain waves, the more growth hormone your body releases. And growth hormone doesn't just float around in your bloodstream doing nothing. It binds to receptors on your muscle cells and initiates a cascade of anabolic processes. Growth hormone stimulates protein synthesis, the fundamental process by which your cells construct new proteins from amino acids. It promotes the uptake of amino acids into muscle tissue, essentially pulling the raw materials for muscle construction out of your bloodstream and delivering them to the cells that need them most. It also triggers the release of insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, from your liver and directly from muscle tissue itself. IGF-1 is another incredibly potent anabolic hormone that works synergistically with growth hormone to promote muscle growth, repair, and adaptation. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The relationship between sleep and growth hormone isn't just about quantity. It's about timing. Your body has what scientists call a circadian rhythm, an internal biological clock that regulates when certain processes happen. Growth hormone release, under normal circumstances, is tightly synchronized to this circadian clock, and, more specifically, to your sleep-wake cycle. Research shows that growth hormone secretion is closely tied to sleep onset rather than to a particular time of day. Scientists demonstrated this beautifully in experiments where they inverted people's sleep schedules, having them sleep during the day and stay awake at night. What happened to growth hormone? It shifted right along with the sleep schedule. The major pulse of growth hormone secretion still occurred shortly after sleep onset, regardless of whether that was at midnight or at noon. This tells us something crucial. It's not merely the act of lying down or being inactive that triggers growth hormone release. It's the specific neurological state of sleep, particularly deep sleep, that activates this hormonal cascade. Now, let's talk about what happens when you don't get adequate sleep. When you restrict your sleep to, say, 5 hours a night instead of 8 or 9, you're not just cutting back on rest time. You're dramatically reducing the window during which this critical growth hormone pulse can occur. Remember, that major surge happens in the first hour or two of sleep, during the first cycle of slow-wave sleep. But your body needs to cycle through lighter stages of sleep first, before reaching that deep restorative phase. When you short yourself on sleep, you might barely touch deep sleep, or you might experience it briefly before your alarm pulls you back to consciousness. The result? Significantly reduced growth hormone secretion. Studies measuring 24-hour growth hormone levels in sleep-deprived individuals consistently show reductions of 30 to 40% compared to well-rested individuals. That's not a minor decrease. That's cutting your primary anabolic hormone production by nearly half. But growth hormone is only part of the story. Another absolutely critical hormone for muscle recovery and growth is testosterone. Now, testosterone doesn't get released in the same pulsatile pattern as growth hormone during sleep. Instead, testosterone follows a different but equally important rhythm. Testosterone levels are lowest in the late evening, and they begin rising gradually as you sleep. They reach their peak in the early morning hours, typically coinciding with the final stages of REM sleep before you wake up. This morning peak isn't coincidental. Research examining testosterone levels throughout the night shows that they can increase by as much as 20 to 30% from evening lows to morning highs in young, healthy men. And this nocturnal rise is directly dependent on sleep. Studies tracking testosterone levels during sleep deprivation show that even a single week of restricted sleep, sleeping only 5 hours per night, reduces testosterone levels by 10 to 15%. That's the equivalent of aging 10 to 15 years in terms of testosterone decline, achieved in just 1 week of insufficient sleep. Recent research with military personnel provides even more dramatic evidence. In a study of U.S. Army Rangers subjected to 1 night of total sleep deprivation during training exercises, testosterone levels dropped by 25 to 28%. These weren't sedentary individuals experiencing this decline. These were elite athletes in peak physical condition. And a single night of lost sleep was sufficient to trigger a hormonal shift equivalent to aging decades. The mechanism behind sleep's influence on testosterone involves the restoration of the hypothalamic-pituitary-gonadal axis. This is the hormonal system responsible for testosterone production. During sleep, particularly during REM sleep, this axis resets and recalibrates. The hypothalamus releases pulses of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary to release luteinizing hormone, which in turn instructs the testes to produce testosterone. This entire cascade requires adequate sleep to proceed normally. When sleep is disrupted, fragmented, or cut short, this hormonal cascade gets interrupted. The pulses become irregular, the signals weaken, and testosterone production declines. It's worth emphasizing that this isn't just about male health or male muscle growth. Women also produce testosterone, albeit at lower levels than men, and it plays a crucial role in their muscle recovery and adaptation as well. Sleep deprivation affects testosterone production in both sexes, though the magnitude and specific patterns may differ. Now, let's consider what these hormonal changes mean at the cellular level. Let's talk about muscle protein synthesis. This is the fundamental process that determines whether your muscles grow, shrink, or stay the same. Muscle tissue is in constant flux. At every moment, your muscle cells are simultaneously breaking down old, damaged proteins and synthesizing new ones. The balance between these two processes, synthesis and breakdown, determines what happens to your muscle mass. If synthesis exceeds breakdown, you gain muscle. If breakdown exceeds synthesis, you lose muscle. It's that simple, at least in principle. What makes it complex is all the factors that influence this balance. Exercise, particularly resistance training, creates a powerful stimulus for protein synthesis. After a hard workout, protein synthesis rates in the exercised muscles can increase by 50% or more for the first few hours. This elevation can persist for 24 to 48 hours or even longer, depending on the training stimulus and the individual's training status. But here's the critical question. Does this elevated protein synthesis actually translate into muscle growth? The answer depends entirely on whether you're providing your body with the resources and conditions necessary to capitalize on that stimulus. And sleep represents the most important condition of all. Research examining muscle protein synthesis during sleep compared to waking hours reveals fascinating insights. Under normal circumstances, when someone gets adequate sleep, muscle protein synthesis rates during the night are typically slightly lower than daytime rates. This makes sense because you're not eating. You're not providing acute amino acid signals, and your body is in a fasted state. However, these nighttime synthesis rates remain elevated above baseline, and they're occurring in conjunction with minimal protein breakdown due to the anabolic hormonal environment created by growth hormone, testosterone, and low cortisol levels during certain phases of sleep. The real issue emerges when sleep is inadequate. Recent groundbreaking research has directly measured muscle protein synthesis rates in people subjected to sleep deprivation. In one particularly well-designed study, researchers had healthy young adults undergo one night of complete sleep deprivation, then measured their muscle protein synthesis rates the following day after consuming a protein-rich meal, a situation that normally provokes a robust anabolic response. The results were striking. Sleep deprivation reduced muscle protein synthesis rates by 18%, compared to the control condition where the same individuals had slept normally. 18% might not sound dramatic, but consider what this means over time. If you're consistently operating with an 18% reduction in your muscle's ability to synthesize new proteins, you're not going to build muscle effectively, regardless of how intensely you train. Another study took a slightly different approach, examining the effects of 5 consecutive nights of sleep restriction, 4 hours in bed each night. This more closely mimics what many people experience in real life, especially during busy periods. The findings showed that this chronic partial sleep restriction reduced myofibrillar protein synthesis rates by 19%. Myofibrillar proteins are the contractile proteins that make up the bulk of muscle fiber structure and determine muscle strength and size. Reducing their synthesis rate by nearly 20% represents a massive impediment to muscle development. What's particularly important to understand is that these reductions in protein synthesis weren't due to decreased training stimulus or reduced protein intake. The subjects in these studies were controlling for those variables. They were consuming the same amount of protein, and they were either not training or were following identical training protocols. The only variable that changed was sleep. Yet sleep deprivation alone was sufficient to substantially impair the muscle's ability to synthesize new proteins. The mechanisms underlying this impairment involve several interconnected pathways, but one of the most important is the mTOR signaling pathway. mTOR stands for Mechanistic Target of Rapamycin, and it's essentially the master regulator of protein synthesis in your cells. When mTOR is activated, it initiates a cascade of events that ramp up the cellular machinery responsible for translating genetic information into actual proteins. Exercise activates mTOR through mechanical tension and metabolic stress. Protein consumption activates mTOR through amino acid availability, particularly the amino acid leucine. These signals tell your muscle cells resources are available, conditions are favorable, start building. But sleep deprivation appears to interfere with mTOR signaling. Research examining brain tissue has shown that sleep deprivation reduces mTOR activity through activation of a cellular energy sensor called AMPK. When AMPK senses energy deficit, which happens during sleep deprivation because your cells aren't getting adequate recovery time, it inhibits mTOR as a protective mechanism. The cell is essentially saying, "We don't have enough resources to support growth right now, so let's shut down construction projects and conserve energy." While most of this research has focused on brain tissue and memory formation, similar mechanisms likely operate in skeletal muscle based on the observed reductions in protein synthesis rates. The hormonal changes we discussed earlier, reduced growth hormone and testosterone, altered insulin sensitivity, elevated cortisol, all feed into this picture. These hormones directly influence mTOR signaling. Growth hormone and testosterone promote mTOR activation. Cortisol, particularly when chronically elevated due to sleep deprivation, can inhibit it. The net result is a muscle cell that's receiving conflicting signals. The exercise stimulus is saying grow, but the hormonal environment and the cellular energy status are saying conserve. This brings us to another crucial aspect of sleep and muscle recovery: cortisol. We've talked about the anabolic hormones, growth hormone and testosterone, but we need to understand the catabolic side of the equation as well. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. It's released in response to physical stress, psychological stress, lack of sleep, and low blood sugar. Under normal circumstances, cortisol follows a predictable daily rhythm. It's highest in the early morning, peaking just after you wake up, and it declines throughout the day, reaching its lowest point in the evening as you prepare for sleep. This pattern makes sense. The morning cortisol surge helps mobilize energy and wake you up. The evening decline facilitates sleep onset and promotes anabolic processes during the night. But sleep deprivation disrupts this carefully orchestrated rhythm. Research consistently shows that sleep deprivation, even after just one night, increases cortisol levels, particularly during the evening and nighttime hours when cortisol should be low. In one study, subjects deprived of sleep for one night showed a 21% increase in cortisol levels the following day compared to when they'd slept normally. This elevation was most pronounced during the afternoon and evening. Why does this matter for muscle recovery? Because cortisol has catabolic properties. Research indicates it promotes protein breakdown, particularly in muscle tissue. It interferes with insulin signaling, making your muscles less responsive to the anabolic effects of insulin. Studies also show it can interfere with growth hormone signaling and testosterone production. When cortisol is chronically elevated due to insufficient sleep, you're essentially bathing your muscle tissue in a catabolic hormone at precisely the time when you need to be in an anabolic state. It's like trying to fill a bathtub while the drain is partially open. Sure, some water goes in, but a significant portion is simultaneously flowing out. Similarly, you might be stimulating protein synthesis through training and nutrition. But if cortisol levels are elevated, you're simultaneously increasing protein breakdown, negating some or all of your anabolic efforts. Now, let's zoom out and look at what all of this means for actual athletic performance and real-world outcomes. Because ultimately, what we care about isn't just cellular mechanisms and hormone levels. We care about whether we're getting stronger, faster, more powerful, and more capable. And the research examining sleep's impact on athletic performance tells a compelling story. A comprehensive meta-analysis examining the effects of sleep loss on physical performance analyzed data from 69 published studies involving nearly 1,000 participants. The findings showed that sleep loss reduced exercise performance by an average of 7.5% across all types of exercise tested. This included anaerobic power, speed, endurance, strength, high-intensity interval exercise, and sport-specific skills. 7.5% might not sound like much, but consider what it means in practice. If you can normally bench press 200 pounds for 10 reps, a 7.5% performance decrease means you might only manage 9 reps, or you might only be able to lift 185 pounds for that same 10 reps. If you can normally sprint 100 meters in 12 seconds, 7.5% slower means 12.9 seconds. In competitive athletics, these differences separate winners from losers, personal records from mediocre performances. What's particularly revealing about this meta-analysis is that different types of sleep loss had different effects. Total sleep deprivation, staying awake for 24 hours or more, had the most dramatic impact on performance. But what researchers call late restriction, which means cutting sleep short by waking up early, also significantly impaired performance. Early restriction, which means going to bed late but getting to sleep in, had less impact on physical performance, though it still affected cognitive function and mood. This pattern aligns with what we know about sleep architecture. Remember that growth hormone pulse happens early in the night, during the first cycle of deep sleep. If you stay up late, but still sleep in and get a full night's rest, you're still getting that critical growth hormone release. But if you go to bed at a reasonable hour, but wake up early, you're truncating your sleep during the latter half of the night, when you should be experiencing REM sleep and that morning testosterone surge. Both scenarios aren't ideal, but cutting sleep short in the morning appears to have more pronounced effects on physical performance and recovery. Specific studies provide even more granular insights. Research with collegiate weightlifters found that 24 hours of sleep deprivation reduced their performance on several lifts. Squat performance, bench press, deadlift, clean, all showed decrements. But sub-maximal efforts were affected more severely than maximal efforts. In other words, when these athletes were asked to lift a weight they could normally handle for multiple reps, sleep deprivation reduced the number of reps they could perform more dramatically than it reduced their 1-rep max strength. Why does this matter? Because most muscle-building training happens in the sub-maximal range. You're not constantly testing your 1-rep max. You're performing sets of 5, 8, 10, 12 reps. If sleep deprivation is impairing your ability to complete those sets with the weight you'd normally use, you're not providing the same training stimulus. Your muscles aren't experiencing the same volume of work. And volume, sets times reps times load, is one of the primary drivers of muscle growth. Studies with team sport athletes reveal similar patterns. Sprint times decrease after sleep deprivation. Tennis serve accuracy drops dramatically. Some studies showing decreases of 50% or more after sleep restriction. Basketball players experience slower reaction times, reduced shooting accuracy, and decreased overall mood and well-being. In one particularly comprehensive study, basketball players who extended their sleep to 10 hours per night showed improvements across multiple performance metrics. Their sprint times improved from an average of 16.2 seconds at baseline to 15.5 seconds after several weeks of sleep extension. Their free throw accuracy increased by 9%. Their three-point shooting accuracy increased by 9.2%. Their reaction times on cognitive tests improved significantly. These aren't marginal gains. These are substantial performance enhancements achieved through a single intervention: sleeping more. Similar results emerged from research with swimmers. When male and female collegiate swimmers extended their sleep to 10 hours per night, their 15-meter sprint times improved. Their reaction times off the starting blocks became faster. Their turn times decreased, and their mood improved, while feelings of fatigue decreased. The pattern is remarkably consistent across different sports, different populations, and different study designs. More sleep equals better performance, while sleep deprivation equals performance decrements. But performance during training is only part of the equation. What about recovery? What about injury risk? What about the long-term sustainability of an athletic pursuit? These questions are equally important, and the data here is just as compelling. Research examining injury rates among athletes consistently shows that insufficient sleep increases injury risk. One large study of adolescent athletes found that those sleeping fewer than 8 hours per night had nearly twice the injury rate of those sleeping 8 hours or more. The mechanism likely involves multiple factors. Sleep deprivation impairs reaction time and cognitive function, which can lead to poor decision-making and delayed responses to potentially dangerous situations. It also affects motor control and coordination, making athletes more likely to move awkwardly or fail to execute proper technique. But beyond these acute cognitive and motor effects, chronic sleep restriction impairs tissue recovery and adaptation. If your muscles aren't recovering fully between training sessions, if your connective tissues aren't repairing micro-damage, if your nervous system isn't regenerating adequately, you're accumulating fatigue and damage. Eventually, something gives. This could explain why tendons that have been subjected to repeated stress without adequate recovery become more vulnerable to injury, why muscles that haven't fully healed from previous training sessions are more susceptible to strains, and why joints experiencing ongoing stress without proper recovery time become inflamed and painful. This is why overtraining syndrome, which we mentioned earlier, is so closely linked to sleep disturbances. Athletes who develop overtraining syndrome almost universally report sleep problems, difficulty falling asleep, frequent awakening, poor sleep quality, and insufficient sleep duration. The relationship is bidirectional. Overtraining disrupts sleep, and poor sleep prevents recovery from training stress, creating a vicious cycle that can derail an athlete's progress for months. Now, let's talk about practical recovery timelines. What actually happens during a night of sleep from a muscle recovery perspective? Let's walk through it step by step, starting from the moment you close your eyes. In the first 30 to 60 minutes after you fall asleep, you're transitioning through light sleep stages. Your brain waves are slowing down. Your body temperature is dropping. Your heart rate is decreasing. This is important preparation, but the major anabolic processes haven't kicked into high gear yet. Then, usually about 60 to 90 minutes after sleep onset, you enter your first period of deep, slow-wave sleep. This is when that massive growth hormone pulse occurs. Your pituitary gland is flooding your bloodstream with this powerful anabolic hormone. Growth hormone levels in your blood spike dramatically, reaching peak concentrations. This surge typically lasts 1.5 to 3 hours. During this time, growth hormone is binding to receptors throughout your body, but particularly in your muscle tissue, liver, and bone. In your muscle cells, growth hormone is stimulating protein synthesis, promoting amino acid uptake, and triggering IGF-1 production. In your liver, it's stimulating the production and release of IGF-1 into your bloodstream, which will circulate throughout your body and further enhance the anabolic state. This first deep sleep period and its associated growth hormone surge are absolutely critical for recovery. If you're awakened during this phase, or if you don't enter deep sleep adequately, you miss this crucial window of hormone release. After this first deep sleep period, you cycle back through lighter sleep stages and then enter your first REM period, typically 90 to 120 minutes after falling asleep. REM sleep serves different functions than deep sleep. It's primarily important for memory consolidation, motor learning, and psychological restoration. For athletes, REM sleep is where motor patterns practiced during the day get consolidated and refined. The neural pathways controlling complex movements are strengthened and optimized. As the night progresses, you continue cycling through these stages, but the pattern shifts. Your second and third sleep cycles still include periods of deep sleep, though typically shorter than that initial period. You might get another smaller growth hormone pulse during the second deep sleep period, though it won't match the magnitude of that first surge. Meanwhile, your cortisol levels, which have been low through the early and middle portions of the night, begin to rise in the pre-dawn hours. This isn't a bad thing. This is the normal circadian pattern. Cortisol is preparing your body to wake up, mobilizing glucose stores, and providing energy for the upcoming day. What's important is that cortisol has remained low during the majority of your sleep period, allowing those anabolic processes to proceed without interference. In the final hours of sleep, particularly during the last REM cycles before you wake, your testosterone levels reach their peak. This morning testosterone surge provides another anabolic signal, one that will persist into your waking hours and support recovery and adaptation throughout the day. When you finally wake up, ideally after 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep, your body has completed multiple cycles of deep sleep and REM sleep. You've received multiple pulses of growth hormone, though that first one was by far the largest. You've maintained an anabolic hormonal environment for most of the night. Your testosterone has risen to its daily peak. Your cortisol is elevated to help you wake up, but this is appropriate timing. And at the cellular level, your muscle cells have been engaged in active protein synthesis, repairing damage from yesterday's training and building new contractile proteins to adapt to the stress you imposed. But what happens if you only sleep 5 or 6 hours? You might get that first deep sleep period and its associated growth hormone pulse, though it might be truncated or less pronounced due to accumulated sleep debt. But you definitely miss the later deep sleep periods, the later REM periods, and that critical morning testosterone surge. You wake up with cortisol be elevated, but testosterone still at its nighttime low. Your body hasn't completed its recovery process. The anabolic work is unfinished. If this happens occasionally, you can probably compensate. One night of poor sleep, while not ideal, won't destroy your progress. But if it becomes a pattern, 5 or 6 hours of sleep most nights, you're chronically operating in an incomplete recovery state. You're training hard, breaking down muscle tissue, creating the stimulus for adaptation, but you're not providing the recovery time necessary for that adaptation to actually occur. This raises an important question. How much sleep do you actually need for optimal recovery? The research suggests that most adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night for general health, but athletes may need more. Several studies examining sleep duration in athletes suggest that 9 to 10 hours might be optimal for maximizing recovery and performance. This recommendation is based on sleep extension studies showing that athletes who increased their sleep to 9 or 10 hours per night experienced performance improvements, suggesting they were previously operating with a sleep deficit even at 7 or 8 hours. Individual variation exists, of course. Some people might thrive on 8 hours, while others need 9. Factors like age, training volume, training intensity, and stress levels all influence sleep requirements. Younger athletes undergoing rapid growth may need even more sleep than mature adults. Athletes in heavy training cycles need more sleep than during lighter maintenance phases. Athletes dealing with high stress or poor nutrition may need additional sleep to compensate for these additional stressors. The key is paying attention to subjective indicators of recovery. How do you feel when you wake up? Do you feel genuinely refreshed? Or do you feel like you could sleep several more hours? How's your mood? Your motivation to train? Your perceived energy levels? If you're consistently waking up feeling unrefreshed, if your motivation for training is low, if you're irritable and fatigued, if your performance is stagnating or declining despite consistent training, insufficient sleep is likely a contributing factor. Now let's address a common question. What about sleep quality versus sleep quantity? Both matter, but they're not interchangeable. Sleeping 10 hours of fragmented, poor quality sleep isn't the same as sleeping 8 hours of deep, restorative sleep. Quality matters because it determines how much time you spend in those critical deep sleep and REM sleep stages. If you're in bed for 8 hours but you're waking up frequently, if you're spending most of your time in light sleep, if you're barely touching deep sleep or REM sleep, you're not getting the full recovery benefits. Sleep quality is influenced by numerous factors. Your sleep environment plays a huge role. Temperature is particularly important. Your body temperature needs to drop slightly for you to enter deep sleep. Research suggests that sleeping in a cool room around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit promotes better sleep architecture. Light is another critical factor. Your brain uses light exposure to set your circadian clock. Exposure to bright light in the evening, particularly blue light from electronic devices, can delay sleep onset and reduce sleep quality. Creating a dark sleeping environment using blackout curtains or an eye mask promotes deeper, more restorative sleep. Noise can fragment sleep, pulling you out of deep sleep into lighter stages. Using white noise or ensuring a quiet environment can help maintain sleep continuity. Your pre-sleep routine also matters. Engaging in stressful activities right before bed, consuming caffeine in the evening, eating large meals close to bedtime, intense exercise within a few hours of sleep. All of these can impair sleep quality. What about naps? Can napping compensate for inadequate nighttime sleep? The research suggests that naps can provide some benefit, particularly for acute sleep deprivation. Studies show that a 20 to 30-minute nap can improve alertness, reaction time, and mood. For athletes, napping after a poor night's sleep can partially restore performance on tests conducted later in the day. One study found that athletes who napped for 30 minutes after partial sleep deprivation performed better on sprint tests than those who didn't nap. However, naps can't fully replace nighttime sleep, particularly regarding hormonal rhythms. Remember that massive growth hormone pulse we discussed? That specifically occurs during nighttime sleep, during the first period of slow-wave sleep after a normal sleep-wake cycle. You don't get that same hormonal response from a daytime nap. Naps can help manage acute sleep loss and maintain performance, but they're a supplement to, not a replacement for, adequate nighttime sleep. Let's talk about some special considerations for different populations. Young athletes going through growth and development have different sleep needs than mature adults. Adolescents naturally shift toward later bedtimes and later wake times due to changes in their circadian rhythm during puberty. Yet many schools start early in the morning, forcing teenagers to wake up when their bodies are still primed for sleep. This creates a chronic sleep restriction that affects not only their academic performance, but also their athletic development. For young athletes, adequate sleep is crucial, not just for recovery from training, but for overall growth and development. Growth hormone plays important roles beyond muscle tissue. It influences bone growth, tissue development, and maturation. Research indicates that adolescent athletes who consistently sleep fewer than 8 hours per night may experience impaired growth, delayed development, and increased injury risk. Ensuring adequate sleep during these critical developmental years should be a priority for parents, coaches, and the athletes themselves. Aging presents different challenges. As we get older, our sleep architecture changes. Older adults typically spend less time in deep, slow-wave sleep and experience more sleep fragmentation. They also tend to produce less growth hormone overall, and the pulsatile nature of growth hormone secretion becomes less pronounced. This contributes to age-related muscle loss, or sarcopenia. But research suggests that maintaining good sleep quality as we age can help mitigate these changes. Older adults who prioritize sleep, who create optimal sleep environments, and who maintain consistent sleep schedules show better preservation of muscle mass and strength compared to those with poor sleep. While aging inevitably changes our hormonal profiles and sleep architecture, the fundamental relationship between sleep and recovery remains. An older athlete might need to be even more diligent about sleep than a younger athlete to achieve similar recovery outcomes. Female athletes face unique considerations related to the menstrual cycle. Hormonal fluctuations throughout the cycle can affect sleep quality, with many women reporting worse sleep during the late luteal phase and during menstruation. These same phases of the cycle can also affect training adaptation and recovery. The interplay between menstrual hormones and sleep is complex, but the key point is that female athletes may need to be particularly attentive to sleep during certain phases of their cycle to maintain optimal recovery. There's also the question of whether endurance athletes and strength athletes have different sleep needs. While both types of athletes benefit from adequate sleep, some research suggests the specific adaptations they're seeking might be differentially affected by sleep. Endurance athletes rely heavily on mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria in muscle cells, and metabolic adaptations. These processes occur during recovery periods and are influenced by sleep. Studies indicate that sleep deprivation can impair mitochondrial function and may reduce the body's ability to generate new mitochondria in response to training stimulus. Strength athletes, meanwhile, are primarily concerned with muscle protein synthesis and muscle fiber hypertrophy. As we've discussed extensively, sleep is absolutely critical for these processes. The hormonal environment during sleep, the suppression of catabolic hormones, and the cellular processes activated during rest all contribute to muscle growth. In practical terms, both endurance and strength athletes need to prioritize sleep, though the specific mechanisms by which sleep supports their adaptations might differ. Let's address some practical strategies for optimizing sleep for recovery. First, consistency matters immensely. Going to bed at roughly the same time each night and waking up at roughly the same time each morning helps stabilize your circadian rhythm. Your body thrives on predictability. When you maintain a consistent schedule, your hormonal rhythms synchronize with your sleep-wake pattern, optimizing the timing of growth hormone release, testosterone production, and cortisol rhythms. Second, create a sleep-conducive environment. Make your bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. Invest in blackout curtains or a comfortable eye mask. Consider white noise if you live in a noisy area. Ensure your mattress and pillows support comfortable sleep. These might seem like minor details, but they add up to significant differences in sleep quality over time. Third, establish a wind-down routine. Your body and brain need transition time between the alertness of waking activity and the relaxation of sleep. Spending 30 to 60 minutes before bed engaging in calming activities signals to your nervous system that it's time to prepare for sleep. This might include reading, gentle stretching, meditation, or simply sitting quietly. Avoid screens during this time, as the blue light they emit can suppress melatonin production and delay sleep onset. Fourth, time your training appropriately. Intense exercise raises your core body temperature and increases arousal, both of which can interfere with sleep onset if the exercise occurs too close to bedtime. Try to finish intense training at least 2 to 3 hours before you plan to sleep. This gives your body time to cool down and your nervous system time to shift out of its heightened state. If you must train in the evening, consider making those sessions less intense or focusing on lower intensity work. Fifth, be strategic about nutrition timing. Eating a large meal close to bedtime can interfere with sleep by increasing metabolic activity and body temperature. However, going to bed hungry can also impair sleep. Some research suggests that consuming a small amount of protein before bed, perhaps 20 to 30 grams, can support overnight muscle protein synthesis without disrupting sleep. Casein protein has been studied for this purpose because it's digested slowly, which could provide a steady supply of amino acids throughout the night, though individual responses may vary. Sixth, manage your light exposure. Get bright light exposure early in the day, particularly sunlight. This helps set your circadian clock and promotes alertness during the day. Then, as evening approaches, reduce your light exposure. Dim the lights in your home, avoid bright screens, and create a dimmer environment that signals to your body that it's time to wind down. Seventh, consider your caffeine intake carefully. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours, meaning that half the caffeine from a cup of coffee consumed at 2 in the afternoon is still in your system at 8 in the evening. If you're sensitive to caffeine's effects on sleep, you might need to avoid it entirely after noon, or even earlier. Some people can drink coffee in the evening and sleep fine. But many people who think they're unaffected by caffeine are actually experiencing subtle reductions in sleep quality that they don't consciously perceive. Eighth, manage stress. Psychological stress elevates cortisol, which can interfere with sleep onset and sleep quality. If you're lying in bed with your mind racing, thinking about work problems or relationship issues or training concerns, you're not going to sleep well. Developing stress management techniques, whether that's meditation, journaling, talking to a friend or therapist, or simply having a regular routine for processing and releasing daily stress, can significantly improve sleep quality. What about supplements that might aid sleep and recovery? Melatonin is probably the most well-known sleep supplement. It's a hormone that your body naturally produces in response to darkness, signaling that it's time to sleep. Supplemental melatonin, typically in doses of 1 to 3 milligrams, can help with sleep onset, particularly if you're dealing with jet lag or shift work. However, it's not a universal sleep-enhancing supplement. If your body is already producing adequate melatonin and your circadian rhythm is properly aligned, supplemental melatonin might not provide additional benefit. Magnesium is another supplement often recommended for sleep. Magnesium plays a role in hundreds of enzymatic reactions in your body, and some research suggests that magnesium deficiency can impair sleep quality. Supplementing with magnesium, glycinate or magnesium threonate in doses of 200 to 400 milligrams before bed might help some people sleep better, particularly if they have insufficient dietary intake. However, if you're getting adequate magnesium from your diet, supplementation may not provide noticeable benefits. Vitamin D is worth mentioning because vitamin D deficiency has been associated with poor sleep quality in some research. Ensuring you have adequate vitamin D status through sun exposure, diet, or supplementation might indirectly support better sleep, though the exact mechanisms are still being investigated. Maintaining sufficient vitamin D levels is important for overall health, regardless of its specific effects on sleep. Beyond these specific interventions, it's worth emphasizing that sleep is not just about recovery from training. It's about overall health optimization. Poor sleep is linked to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, impaired immune function, cognitive decline, and mental health issues. When you prioritize sleep for athletic performance and muscle recovery, you're simultaneously supporting every other system in your body. One fascinating aspect of sleep that we haven't fully explored is the relationship between sleep and nutrient partitioning. Nutrient partitioning refers to how your body decides what to do with the calories and nutrients you consume. Does it store them as fat? Use them for immediate energy? Direct them toward muscle growth? Sleep influences these decisions in subtle but important ways. When you're sleep-deprived, your insulin sensitivity decreases. This means your cells, including your muscle cells, become less responsive to insulin's signals. Normally, insulin helps shuttle glucose and amino acids into muscle tissue, supporting recovery and growth. When insulin sensitivity is impaired, this suggests nutrients may be more likely to be stored as fat, rather than being utilized for muscle protein synthesis. Research shows that even a few nights of sleep restriction can reduce insulin sensitivity by up to 25%. Sleep deprivation also affects appetite-regulating hormones. Ghrelin, the hormone that stimulates hunger, increases when you're sleep-deprived. Leptin, the hormone that signals fullness and satiety, decreases. The result is increased hunger and a tendency to overeat, particularly craving calorie-dense, high-carbohydrate foods. For athletes trying to maintain a particular body composition or manage their weight, sleep deprivation creates a double challenge. Your body is less efficient at using nutrients for muscle growth, and you're simultaneously more likely to overeat and store excess calories as fat. There's also emerging research on the relationship between sleep and the gut microbiome. Your gut bacteria play important roles in digestion, nutrient absorption, immune function, and even the production of certain neurotransmitters and hormones. Recent studies suggest that sleep deprivation can alter the composition and function of the gut microbiome, which may affect overall health and recovery. While this area of research is still developing, it represents another potential pathway through which sleep influences physiological function and performance. Let's talk about monitoring your sleep. In recent years, wearable devices that track sleep have become increasingly popular. These devices use various sensors to estimate time spent in different sleep stages, track heart rate and heart rate variability during sleep, and provide metrics on sleep duration and continuity. Can these devices help optimize your sleep for recovery? The answer is nuanced. These consumer devices aren't as accurate as polysomnography, the gold standard sleep measurement conducted in sleep labs. They can make errors in classifying sleep stages, particularly between light sleep and REM sleep. However, they're generally decent at tracking total sleep time and detecting major disruptions. If you're using a sleep tracker, focus less on the specific breakdown of sleep stages, which may not be entirely accurate, and more on patterns over time. Is your total sleep time consistent? Are you frequently waking during the night? How does your sleep change in response to different behaviors or stressors? One potential downside of sleep tracking is that some people become anxious about their sleep metrics, which paradoxically impairs their sleep. If you find yourself lying awake worrying about whether you're getting enough deep sleep, the device might be doing more harm than good. Use sleep tracking as a tool for gathering information and identifying patterns, but don't let it become a source of stress. Perhaps the best way to assess whether you're getting adequate sleep is to pay attention to how you feel and how you're performing. Do you wake up feeling refreshed? Do you maintain energy throughout the day without needing excessive caffeine? Is your mood stable? Are you making progress in your training? Are you recovering adequately between sessions? If the answers to these questions are consistently positive, you're probably sleeping enough, regardless of what any particular device says. The relationship between sleep and adaptation extends beyond just muscle recovery. Motor learning, the process by which you acquire and refine movement skills, is heavily dependent on sleep, particularly REM sleep. When you practice a new exercise or refine your technique on a familiar movement, you're creating and strengthening neural pathways. During sleep, especially REM sleep, your brain consolidates these motor memories, strengthening the neural patterns that represent skilled movement. Research in this area has shown that athletes who sleep well after learning a new motor skill show better retention and performance of that skill the next day compared to athletes who were sleep-deprived. This has practical implications. If you're working on improving your squat technique or learning a new exercise or refining your running form, getting good sleep after those practice sessions will help cement those improvements. Poor sleep can actually interfere with skill acquisition and refinement. There's also the question of how sleep interacts with other recovery modalities. Ice baths, massage, compression garments, foam rolling. Athletes use all sorts of recovery interventions. How do these compare to sleep? While some of these interventions can provide benefits, none of them can replace sleep. Sleep addresses recovery at a fundamental level: hormonal, cellular, neurological. Most other recovery modalities work through more limited mechanisms. That doesn't mean they're useless. A massage might help reduce muscle soreness and improve blood flow. Compression garments might help clear metabolic waste from muscle tissue. Ice baths might reduce inflammation in certain contexts. But these are supplementary to, not replacements for, the fundamental recovery process that occurs during sleep. If you're trying to decide whether to spend time on an elaborate recovery protocol or simply get an extra hour of sleep, the sleep is almost certainly the better choice. As we approach the end of our exploration, let's return to the fundamental question we started with. Why does sleep control muscle recovery more than training? Because training provides the stimulus, but sleep provides the conditions necessary for adaptation to that stimulus. Training breaks down tissue and creates the signal for your body to adapt. But the actual adaptation, the construction of new proteins, the repair of damaged fibers, the strengthening of neural pathways, the optimization of metabolic processes, all of this happens during recovery. And the most powerful recovery occurs during sleep. Your body functions to rebuild and repair during rest. The hormonal cascades that flood your bloodstream with anabolic hormones during sleep, the reduction in catabolic stress hormones, the activation of cellular pathways that promote protein synthesis, the consolidation of motor learning, the restoration of cellular energy reserves. All of these processes are maximized during quality sleep. You can train with perfect form, consume optimal nutrition, and use every supplement and recovery modality available. But if you're not sleeping adequately, you're undermining all of those other efforts. The good news is that sleep is entirely under your control. Unlike genetics, which you can't change, or age, which is inevitable, or many other factors that influence your progress, sleep is something you can actively prioritize and optimize. It doesn't require expensive equipment or special facilities. It doesn't require complex protocols or extensive knowledge. It simply requires making sleep a non-negotiable priority, creating the conditions for quality sleep, and giving your body the time it needs to do what it's designed to do: rebuild, repair, and adapt. For those watching this who are serious about maximizing their physical development, whether you're a competitive athlete or simply someone who wants to get the most from your training, understanding the critical role of sleep should fundamentally change how you approach your program. It's not just about what you do in the gym, it's about what you do in the bedroom. It's about recognizing that those hours of darkness, those hours when you're completely unconscious and seemingly inactive, represent the most active anabolic period your body experiences. Every time you choose to stay up late scrolling through your phone, every time you cut your sleep short to squeeze in more work or more activities, every time you underestimate the importance of quality rest, you're directly sabotaging your own goals. Conversely, every time you prioritize sleep, every time you create optimal conditions for deep restorative rest, every time you give your body those full 8 or 9 or 10 hours it needs, you're maximizing your body's ability to adapt, grow, and improve. The science is clear, the mechanisms are well established, and the practical implications are straightforward. Sleep isn't a luxury for athletes. It's a necessity. It's not something you fit in if you have time. It's something you make time for because it's that important. The hours you spend unconscious in the dark are when your conscious efforts in the gym actually translate into physical results. So tonight and every night, when you lay down to sleep, remember that you're not just resting. You're growing. You're recovering. You're rebuilding stronger than before. You're allowing growth hormone to flood your system, testosterone to surge, protein synthesis to accelerate, and your entire physiology to shift into the most powerful anabolic state it can achieve. That's not passive. That's not wasted time. That's the most productive thing you could possibly be doing for your physical development. Thank you for watching this After Dark episode of the Optimal Life Project. If this deep dive into the relationship between sleep and muscle recovery has given you new insights or changed how you think about your own recovery practices, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We create these in-depth explorations because we believe that understanding the why behind the what makes you a more informed and effective practitioner of your own health and fitness. Until next time, prioritize your sleep, and I'll see you in the next one.